podcast that you're listening to is being presented to you with the cooperation of the SJ Network. If you're a person who needs a publicist and you want to appear on podcasts, contact Stephen Joyner at s-j-network.com. Let's get on with the show.
Today's guest in the Sherpa screening room is Adeena Mignogna. She's the author of Crazy Foolish Robot.
Is it my biography? Because I'm most of those things most of the time.
No, not if it was your biography. It would be a Dr. Seuss book.
Probably. But would you read it to a crab? Would you read it in a cab?
Would I read it? No. Let's just get on with the show.
Attention, rebels of the Sherpalution. Today's podcast is brought to you by Audible. We would like to give you a free audiobook download and 30-day free trial simply by heading to www.audibletrial.com/Sherpa. There are over 180,000 titles of audiobooks and podcasts, including this one, to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or MP3 player. And now, the one and only Mr. Bruce will lead you into the Sherpa Chalet. As a reminder, the cool Mount Podcastia air that you are inhaling is a result of the Yak's Burrito dinner.
Coming to you from Sherpa Chalet in beautiful downtown Mount Podcastia, it's time for entertainment interviews in the Sherpa screening room. Grab an aisle seat and a bucket of popcorn, but don't crunch too loud or you'll miss the show. Now, here's your host, Jim, the podcast Sherpa.
Hello there, Rebels, and welcome to the Sherpa Screening Room, a presentation of Too Many Podcasts, featuring me, Jim the Podcast Sherpa. How are you this week? I hope that you're doing well, because we've got a really interesting guest today. Her name is Adeena Mignogna. Very musical name. I like that. Adeena is, well, she might be a musician, but she's not this time. No. Adeena is an engineer with a love of science and science fiction, which coincidentally, when I die, I am leaving my body to science fiction. But Adeena's got this book out and it's called Crazy Foolish Robots. And it sounds like a really cool book. I think if you're especially into the sci-fi thing and you love it as much as she does, especially when things like this are written by people who have that sort of passion for sci-fi, you know it's going to be a good book. And Adeena is a former Long Islander and a self-professed Star Trek lover. She works off of warp drive. Love it. Love the irony, folks. So have a listen to my conversation with Adeena Mignogna, author of Crazy Foolish Robots. Hello there, Rebels, and we're here in the Sherpa screening room, and I've got a lady you should probably be hearing about really soon, or if not already. She, by day, is a software engineer and also has a background as a physicist and an astronomer. But by night, we get to interview her as an author and the author of Crazy Foolish Robots, which is out already. So run to your bookstore right now and get it after the interview's over, because you're going to want to get to know this lady. Her name is Adeena Mignogna. Adeena, welcome to the show.
Hi. Thank you for having me.
It is always a pleasure to have you, my friend. Now, you really get to play two sides of the coin here. You are a lover of science. You're someone who's been fascinated by science and also science fiction.
Yes. And I think they go together pretty well because science fiction can pick up right where science leaves off. Right. So to me, they've always really naturally gone together. And I think a lot of people who are into science also are into science fiction and vice versa. And science fiction, I think, creates some appreciation for actual science. At least it did in my case. And I think it might be true for other people.
I guess with having like a scientific background and as an engineer, you like to delve into things. You like the details, and as well with science fiction, it makes you wonder, okay, well, what about these small details? How could they affect the galaxy? Is that really the way that it works?
Maybe. I would say I'm a little bit more of a big picture person. And I think in some way I'm a little unusual amongst my fellow engineers.
Okay.
People have mostly heard the whole, seeing the forest and the trees. And I've actually spoken to a couple of my coworkers about this recently because a lot of people, really get into the trees. That's a very typical engineer thing, to get into the details. And there are a few of us, that we like to look at the big picture, like how the whole thing comes together, how the whole thing works. And so, while on some levels I'm pretty detail oriented, like I'm the one who, if you throw up a PowerPoint slide, I might see the misspelled word or the missing period at the end of the sentence. So yes, in some ways I'm very detail oriented, but when it comes to the kind of stuff I do or the work I do, I really like to see the big picture, how it all comes together in the end. That's what I love.
Now, your dad was an engineer, right? Was that who inspired you to become an engineer as well, or?
So I think not necessarily directly inspired, but because that's what he was, and I think it was more just by exposure. A little bit, he was a metallurgist and he dabbled with some computer stuff, and so it was there. And I guess just being his daughter, it just kind of rubbed off, and I just had a natural, proclivity towards some of it. And then of course he then encouraged it and just fed on itself from there, maybe.
Now you got to, in a way, mix your two worlds because the engineering that you do deals with satellites.
Yes, it does. And that's there's all kinds of science, of course, but the part that has always excited me has been outer space, going to the moon, going to Mars, space exploration. And of course, that's some of the most fantastic stuff in science fiction too. And I grew up as a big, Star Wars and Star Trek fan. And as my, desire for like my own career took shape, it really was, I want to do space stuff. I want to go out there or help other people go out there, or just kind of enable us generally to go out there. So so I work on satellites. That's been pretty much my entire career.
What exactly do you do in regards to the satellites?
So I'm a combination software engineer and systems engineer, and I've kind of gone back and forth between those two pieces. Currently, I'm what we call a lead systems engineer of a satellite mission, which means I'm responsible for helping it all come together, seeing the big picture. And we have a large team of wonderful engineers, and they're the ones doing all the different details. We have thermal engineers and electrical engineers. And in my role, I'm the one who helps keep it all together and make sure everything is, coming together in the end. And I've worked on a variety of different satellites. Most of my career has been on imaging satellites, so ones that take pictures of the Earth. So if you think of, going to Google Earth and you see some of it is satellite imagery, that's some of the stuff I've worked on. I'm now in the space servicing part of it. So the company I work for, over the last couple of years, we've had a couple interesting missions where we have a satellite that in space connects to another satellite to extend its life. And it's a fairly new thing. We're the only ones who are doing it as far as I'm pretty sure. And so I'm working on some of the next generation evolution of that kind of capability.
What's something about satellites that people maybe have misconceptions about?
I think a lot of people don't, and it's because they don't know the terminology. So when they hear or, which satellites are close to Earth versus which are a little bit further away. And in the industry, we say there's low Earth orbit or LEO, and then there's geosynchronous or GEO. And I think the biggest misconception is understanding that the geosynchronous satellites are pretty far away, and LEO are the ones that are right overhead. So, and the International Space Station is, while it's not a satellite, it's in a LEO orbit. So sometimes you can see it pass by overhead, and it happens just in a few minutes. And it's because it's close by. So it's kind of zooming fast. Where a geosatellite, where it is pretty far away, it's almost like it's hovering over the same location. all the time. And I think that that's one of the big things. And so in science fiction movies and things, people will use those terms and often incorrectly in the movies. And that's one of the things that gets me, because it's one of the easiest things to get correct. But I think that might be one of the biggest things that I come across.
Okay. Now, of course, we have to tie in your love for science fiction, because that's what this interview is all about. Now, what first got you hooked on sci-fi?
My earliest memories of science fiction were I think the Star Wars, the first Star Wars movie, specific, Episode 4, and R2-D2 and C-3PO and the robots. That's my first science fiction memory, followed pretty closely by episodes of the original Star Trek. I think it's that stuff that really got me hooked.
Were you a big reader of sci-fi books as well?
As I got a little older, my dad also was a big fan, and so there's stuff on the shelves. We had Isaac Asimov, Ray Bradbury, a lot of that on the shelves. So yes, I definitely became a reader of that. I guess when I got into high school was right about the time that I was reading that. In addition to, for a while, I was really a big fan of reading the Star Trek novels. There's a series, but then there's novels, which are kind of like extended episodes, that just continue on in the universe. And I devoured those when I was in high school and college.
Now, given your knowledge and your background, are there certain sci-fi movies or even TV shows that you watch and you start to cringe because you're like, no, that wouldn't happen in real life?
Well, so I'm probably one of the most forgiving people I know when it comes to that, because I am looking for good, character stories. And because that's for any kind of fiction, I think that's really what draws people in is good characters and good relatable people. And so, yeah, there are things that are better and worse. In terms of the that would never happen kind of thing. I mean, when science fiction kind of crosses and has a little fantasy element, and Star Wars is certainly, there's a lot of fantasy there. Like I said, I'm probably the person who has the most forgiving nature when it comes to that out of the people I know. So I cringe less if the story is good. That said, the misuse of the term geosynchronous in the movie Enemy of the State is just hurts my head so much. And it was because it could have been fixed so easily. I mean, that was a great movie, and I love Will Smith. I love that movie. But when they talked about a geosynchronous satellite hovering 200 kilometers over Washington, D.C., that's just so wrong in the use of terminology. And they could have just said a satellite over DC, and they didn't have to be any more specific than that, and it would have been just fine. So sometimes things like that, and I remember for 20 years later, and I'll still talk about it. But movies like Gravity, which got a lot right, but also got a lot wrong. I know a lot of my coworkers cringe heavily at that, but it was a really good story, and so much of it was well done that I still just enjoyed it like crazy. And as for television shows, I feel like most of the science fiction television shows that I watch are far enough out there or far enough in the future, because the further you go in the future, there's a lot more that you can accept being, far enough in the future that we don't know what's going to happen. Sure. And so,
kind of a lot of slack.
Yeah. So The Expanse, I think, is a great example of that. And I'm not current on The Expanse right now, but I love The Expanse. The Expanse is fantastic, but and I think fairly well done given what we do know. How things work and extrapolating into the future. So yeah, I can't think of anything else that's completely cringy. Maybe I'm just not watching it. Or not watching enough.
But you know what you like and you know what you don't like.
Oh yeah. And I like a lot. I love all Star Trek. My son even got me into, there's a wonderful cartoon called Elliot from Earth, which is just the funnest and funniest cartoon I've seen in a while. It's on, I can't remember which network. It might be Cartoon Network, and it might be originally directed for in the, youth 7 to 14. I'm not sure exactly what age, but my son's 11 and I'm almost 50. And we both are enjoying the heck out of that show.
So of course we have to talk about your book now, Crazy Foolish Robots.
Yes.
What gave you the idea to write about it?
Well, so I've been off and on trying to write for years and years and years. So this was, in some way, I have a lot of ideas for a lot of science fiction, and this was the one that I actually made it to completion. It started out as a very different novel from, where it is. The original title even was How to Be a Rocket Scientist. And it was about this 17-year-old kid, and he was kind of arrogant, and it was meant to be a little like humorous and a little bit fun, but it was really going in a very different direction, except for there were a lot of robots. Well, over time, as I worked on it, I realized I didn't like the main character. It was annoying. He was cliche. It was terrible. But there was a secondary main character. Her name originally was Stella, and I liked her. And she just seemed to start taking over the story. So I got rid of the guy. I kept her, but I didn't like her name after a while. So I changed it. So my main character's name is Ruby, and the robot stayed and evolved and became what it is today, which is the first book in a planned series of 4. I've got 4 books planned out. I'm madly working to finish book number 2, which has a lot more robots in it. Yeah. And it was one that just kind of, as I worked on it, it fell into place, I guess Give
us a little bit of a synopsis about Crazy Foolish Robots.
Yeah. So Ruby Palmer, she's 19 and she lives on a space station in the middle of the asteroid belt. And she's not entirely happy because she's got to wait till she's a little older to do what she wants to do, which is go live out in Titan and be an explorer. Titan's the moon of Saturn. Well, so she gets a little antsy, decides to leave and kind of basically run away and go, and gets kidnapped by robots, by alien robots. Okay. And the thing to know there is she completely hates robots. She doesn't like robots. She doesn't like artificial intelligence. So being, kidnapped by them, not so good at first, but eventually, it all comes together and they get along and she helps them and they have their adventures together.
And that's probably how it'll continue into the other sections of the series.
Yep.
What are your thoughts about robots today? I mean, in our society?
Mm-hmm. Well, they're a combination of useful and fun. Useful, we have things like the vacuum cleaner robots, which I currently don't have one of those. I did have one. I don't currently. I had one before I had my son, and at least the original generations of them were pretty noisy. So I stopped using it because the only time I felt like I could use it was when he was taking a nap. So it didn't work out for me. But I do want one of them because I think those are, when I did have it, it was great. Actually, it worked really well. So I think there's a lot of practical usefulness. But also I think it's fun. It's a way to learn electronics. It's a way to learn mechanical engineering. And everything. And I know the folks listening won't be able to see this, but you'll be able to see this. I'm working on building a robot cat. And this is my little robot cat. It's a project I found online that was sort of a DIY project. So I 3D printed the parts, the mechanic, the legs and the body and the head. And I bought the electronic components and I'm trying to, so it's physically together and I'm trying to wire it up. And this is just for fun because it's a robot cat.
And like you said, this is an audio podcast, but could you hold it up for a second again? Would you mind?
Yeah, I will.
Yeah. And I mean, you see with cats,
it's orange. Yep. Yeah, it's
the
orange.
Got a tail.
Right. I like a tabby cat. I mean, so the genesis of this partly was because I thought I wanted a pet. I'm allergic to dogs and cats. I love animals, but I'm allergic to them. So I don't know. Somehow I got the idea. So well, if I can't have a real cat, let me have a robot cat instead.
And who better to have a robot cat than someone who writes about robots and humans?
Well, yeah. And I was looking because I had, my big, everyone I think during quarantine made probably a purchase that they ordinarily wouldn't have. Some of us did some retail therapy to get through it. So my quarantine purchase was I bought a 3D printer. I'd wanted one for a long time. And so then, I had that moment of I'm doing it because I'm stuck in the house and I need to do this. And so I had this thought of doing a DIY robot, project. Another one of my coworkers is building a robot arm. And so, when I was looking for a DIY project, I saw the cat, and like I said, it fell into place.
I know I've seen like little videos with the robotic dogs and stuff like that, where they show them walking as well. I'm just hoping that like your robotic cat doesn't like cough up little batteries or anything like that.
No, this one, I'll be lucky if she walks out. I'm kind of worried that I already manhandled the servo motors and that they might not work. So I don't know if this one's going to do much of anything, but it's partly a learning project for me because I play around a little bit with some electronic projects, but it's not, I don't know everything. So I'm still learning as I go. The electronics board is based off of an Arduino board. So for anyone who does know a little bit about like hobby electronics and things, there's like Raspberry Pi boards and Arduino boards. And so this is really just to help me learn just more about that because I want to. And maybe my son will do it with me. And so he'll learn, although I think it's more for me than for him. But the various, I've seen the robot dogs, and there's recently been some videos of a more, on two legs upright. I don't want to say human-like, but, standing on two legs. Some videos that went around from Boston Dynamics and the progress they're making with that, which is incredible. I think that's fascinating.
Do you think people have a reason to be afraid of all this robot technology that's coming their way? Do they? 'Cause I know a lot of people say, they're going to replace me on my job with these robots.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's really all the AI. And while things are getting more sophisticated, doing what they're programmed to do, they're not thinking, they're not sentient like we are. So if you think of a robot like Data from Star Trek: The Next Generation, we are a bazillion years away from that level of, creating that kind of an intelligence. Now, what to still probably be concerned with is the fact that, the AI stuff that we do have, we have Alexa in our house, we have Google Home in our house, we have Siri on our phones, all that stuff. There is a lot. I mean, those are fantastic tools, but they're still just tools. They're not thinking, but they are collecting a lot of data on us. And I'm not worried about the tools, but the people and things behind those tools. What are they doing with my data? I mean, those are still the things I think, those are the more practical things to be worried about, not the tools themselves. The tools themselves are just tools,
I know they had a scare a while back where people were saying that the Alexa devices were recording people's conversations.
Yeah. And
I don't know. I don't know if I've ever said anything of, importance to national security in front of the Alexa.
And again, it's just, if you think about that has nothing to do with the AI itself. It's just a recording device. And then maybe if some software is out there monitoring what you say, that's still not that's not a computer thinking. That's still a programmed algorithm, just possibly looking for keywords or just looking to index words. So like I said, it's not Alexa to be afraid of. It's who knows where, where's your data going and who's doing what with it. And that would be the thing to think about. So don't be afraid. It's like, don't be afraid of the kitchen knife, possibly be afraid of who's holding it.
That's a fair assessment. And I guess, people have to realize that, like you said, it's a question of who's programming this. And it's not like someone's going to come along and they're going to come out with an army of killer robots or anything like that, because they would have to have such advanced knowledge of what, is already known to computer science. Mm-hmm. And and like you said, we're just not there yet.
Yeah. And I mean, so many, a lot of things that people call robots sometimes are really not much more than like a remote control car. Like, so for a while, like the Robot Wars was very popular on TV where, two people have like, I'm calling them quote unquote robots that are battling each other.
Right.
But they're remote controlled the whole time. To me, the interesting thing about robots are when they're not remote controlled, when you are programming them and then you're hands off. Those to me, that's a robot. So a lot of what exists today is remote controlled stuff. So where is the thinking happening? The person holding the remote control. So like I said, there's nothing to be afraid of with the technology, but still maybe the people behind some of the technology.
Right. And I think we had an earlier conversation with like not worrying that we're going to have a scene from the Terminator where the machines are all going to turn on us.
That's not, I'm worried about a lot of things in life. That is not one of them.
Pretty low on the list.
Very, 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 very low on the list. And if you are interested in science fiction that, doesn't put robots in that light, that's where my book comes in. My book comes in because the robots in my book aren't just killer crazy robots. They're funny robots and not trying to kill everybody.
Do they have a human side though? I mean, the way that you've written them, would you say?
Yeah. Yes. In my book, yes. They're very, yes. Think along the lines of like, if you took a combination of R2-D2, Data, Wall-E, from the Disney movie Wall-E, if you mixed all of them together in one with a little humor, you've got the various kinds of robots in my book.
So it's not the classic old 1950s movies with that does not compute. They're a little bit.
Well, there is a little humor like that because, of course, we have in our human speech a lot of idioms and things that you might know the language, but if you don't know the idioms, you're not going to understand. So that might be where some of the humor comes from is in some of the misunderstandings. Yeah.
Do you see this becoming a movie maybe down the line?
Well, that would be the dream, wouldn't it? I would love, that would be so wonderful. And one of the things that would be wonderful is because since I love movies, I love TV, I always love watching like behind the scenes, like how is this made? How is this created? What's the process there? So, my dream one day is for something I write to get turned into a movie or TV show, more because I'm really fascinated and interested in the process of taking this book, making a screenplay and everything that goes into it. And so I would just love to experience that someday.
You've said that in the book, you don't see Ruby in yourself, but actually you see Ruby's mom similar to you. Yes.
And that might just have to be because it's been, Ruby, I said she's 19 and it has been a long time since I was 19. So putting myself in the shoes of a 19-year-old girl is really, really hard where, so it's a little bit easier for me to put myself in the shoes of a 19-year-old's mother. Even though my kids aren't yet that old, I'm closer to that than I am to 19 myself. So I think that's part of it. Yes.
And it's kind of cool that you almost get to insert yourself into the story in a matter of speaking.
A little bit. I mean, like obviously, I think this is true of a lot of writers. You see yourself in a lot of what you create because to some degree, you as a writer, you experience the real world through you. So, that's going to come out in what you write. So, yeah.
Is Ruby's mom named Adeena?
No, I'm wondering I'm trying to think if I actually revealed her name it is not. Oh. And I don't want to say it yet because now I can't remember because it gets revealed since, like I said, I'm madly working on book 2 and by book 2, her name is definitely in it. I can't even remember if it's in book 1. It probably is. Oh dear.
I won't hold you to it, Adeena. Don't worry. Yeah. It's funny because when we're talking about this, a while back, I used to read Clive Cussler novels. And there were a lot of novels where the main character, whose name was Dirk Pitt, he would get into these impossible situations and it would just so happen that somebody would come along and help him, here, I can open this door for you. I can get you out of this jail or whatever the situation might have been. And of course, what did you say your name was? Oh, it's Cussler, Clive Cussler. So he's just conveniently inserting himself in there to fix anything that might go haywire.
I should do that in one story. That would be fun.
Save it for book 4, but we won't tell anybody.
or another one, because there are other things not related to this series in the works too. Like I said, I'm one of those people. I've never had a problem coming up with ideas for stories and for books. It's the finishing them that's the trick.
I know we didn't bring this up earlier. In your job, you said very often, sometimes you were the only female there, and then Other times you work with a lot of other different females, and females getting into engineering and stuff like that. It's, I don't know, an unusual a topic as it used to be like 40 years ago.
Yes. And, so I can say the company I work for Northrop Grumman, which very, very positive place, I think, for women, for minorities. It really is a great place to work, and they do care about supporting everybody. There's a lot of good there. But yeah, I spent a lot of my career really as the only woman. And when I did encounter other women, they weren't in the technical fields. They were in finance or in human resources or, several of the other organizations. It's only been recently that I've been now encountering more, women in technical. In fact, last year was the first year that my own direct manager was a woman. So I'd gone my whole career never actually working for another woman. That said, even for all the years where I was like the only technical woman in the room, I am very, 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 very fortunate that I've worked with some wonderful people that it wasn't it was never a problem. It never I was never held back or it was never a problem. It was just, this is just the way it is. It's sad that's the way it is, but it is the way it is. And we were, it was okay. Cause like I said, I did work with a great group of guys for the most part. But yeah, it is wonderful to see more people getting into this, more women, more minorities, and we need more people. They're really, I think a lot of us are worried that just not enough people are getting into the hard sciences just to begin with, anyone. Yeah. So for anyone who's listening, who might be on that verge of, what am I going to do with my life? Or, consider science, consider physics, consider engineering, consider computer science. There's, so many interesting things going on and so much to do. And we need everybody, and there is a place for everybody.
To mention your employer again, they actually had a hand in creating the lunar module when we went to the moon, right?
Yeah, they have a very interesting history. The lunar module, and here is the funny thing is, so I'm originally from Long Island, and I didn't know that until there was that wonderful series, I guess this was maybe from 20 years ago on HBO, From the Earth to the Moon, that, Tom Hanks did it after he did the Apollo 13 movie.
Sure.
And it was by watching that series. There was an episode called Spider, which was about building the LEM. And I was blown away. Wait a second, this is an old Beth Page. This is like 10 minutes from where I grew up. That was built 10 minutes from where I grew up. Now, of course, it was like a decade before I was born, but I was still amazed. So yeah, that was built by Grumman on Long Island. And, so the Northrop Grumman I work for today is a very different place. And they've bought a lot of different companies, and there's a lot of interesting space history now throughout the company. There is a site out in California where a Star Trek episode had been filmed at back in the 60s. Although at the time it wasn't Northrop Grumman. I think it was one of the old TRW sites that Northrop Grumman purchased. And I came by way of acquisition too. I used to work for a company called Orbital ATK. And before that was Orbital Sciences. And we were purchased, I don't know what the proper language is anymore, by Northrop Grumman a couple of years ago. So that's how I came to be part of it. And we have an interesting history, in space too. The old Orbital was the first company to do a rocket launch from the underside of an airplane. And our vehicle is called Pegasus. And there's some interesting, Star Trek crossover there with the naming of the airplane that launches that. It's called Stargazer, which was deliberately named after Picard's first ship. And then where the office that I work in is on warp drive, which is hilarious every time, every couple of years. Well, now every other year or so, there's a picture where new people discover, hey, look, there's a warp drive, a road named Warp Drive in Virginia. And yep, that's where I work. So yeah, there's a lot of fun crossover at work, with the science and science fiction crossovers.
And with all the Star Trek references you're giving, I'm looking over your shoulder on the video, and you have a Star Trek calendar on your wall.
I do. I have a Star Trek calendar. And what you can't see is I've got a couple autographs up there of Tim Russ. I saw him at a convention a couple years ago. It was my birthday, so it actually says, happy birthday, Adeena.
Do you have a favorite science fiction character?
Wow. Like from all science fiction or just Star Trek or everything but Star Trek?
You can pick wherever you want to pick from.
Oh my gosh, that's hard because I like so much. In Star Trek, Data might be my favorite character. Outside of Star Trek, it might have to be some of the robots from Isaac Asimov's. Yeah, so I think no matter where you go, I'm going to find robots. Robots are going to maybe be my favorite characters anywhere.
Okay. And we can't wrap up this interview without letting people know that you have a website.
Yes, I do. It is my full name, AdeenaMignogna.com. It's hard to spell. So usually I tell people to find me at Twitter because all you need is my first name, which is ADEENA. And from there you can find my website, or if you find Crazy Foolish Robots on Amazon, and you can spell my name and add a .com.
That'll work.
Yep. All those things will work. But it's AdeenaMignogna.com if you can figure out how to spell Mignogna. In retrospect, I probably should have, done something different, but I didn't.
And that'll keep us up to speed when the new books come out as well, right?
Yes. Yeah. Going to any of those places, there's a newsletter that you can get to from my website. And also the website has, I do blog and I do kind of talk about these stories. I actually have more details on the stories of how, my warp drive and work intersects, with Star Trek. And I talk about how it really is actually easier to create intelligence by having a kid as opposed to trying to create a robot. So yeah. I try to, a little silly, but a little serious, on the blog.
Okay. We'll put the link on the show notes too. So if people want to check out
that'll make it easy too.
Anything that could help. Well, that's why I'm Jim the podcast here, but I don't use my actual name because people will be like, wait a minute, how many vowels are in that thing? Never mind. Just all right. Anyway, her name is Adeena Mignogna. She is the author of Crazy Foolish Robots. Go out and get it. And we are looking forward to the sequel and the sequels after that as well. Adeena, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me. It's fun.
We're on that internet thingy at Sherpalution.com.
And that will do it for this week's edition of the Sherpa Screening Room. We are going back to Too Many Podcasts next week with dun dun dun,
the season 7 finale.
And who do we have as a guest on our season 7 finale? Oh, it was so dramatic. I even scared myself. Oh, okay. Oh, back to our guest. Yes. Our guest will be a guy named Dave Jackson. And Dave is the creator of the School of Podcasting. And he's been doing it since 2005, folks. So he knows what it was like back when podcasts were just making their way onto the airwaves and before Mount Podcastia was even formed. That's how long he's been doing it. And we had a wonderful conversation about podcasts and about podcasting. So please tune in and check out this interview. It was a lot of fun. And you can hear all my shows on your favorite podcast apps or, of course, Sherpalution.com. It's all there. It's all there. Everything you need right there. Poof. Sherpalution.com. Mr. Bruce, this is the last Sherpa Screening Room for the season. So let's get the big broom and we'll get all that spooky candy that's stuck to the bottom of the chairs. Okay, folks, I got a little bit of work cut out for me. We will see you next week on the season finale on Too Many Podcasts. So until then, viva la Sherpalution.
Thanks for listening to the Sherpa Screening Room. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, review, and share this podcast. I'm Mr. Bruce, and this has been a Sherpalu Studios production. Viva la Sherpalution!